Happy Friday, everybody. So, for this week's First Chapter Fridays, I decided to use a book that is actually available on Actively Learn. And I know that a lot of the books that I've been sharing with you are, but this one I'm going to read to you straight from Actively Learn. So, if you're interested in this book, if this is something that piques your interest, please go ahead and ask your ELA teacher to assign it to you. Not necessarily as classwork, but just so that you can read it. All right, I hope you enjoy. This one is called Just Mercy, and it is a true story. It's nonfiction, and it is written by Bryan Stevenson. And we are going to be looking at the version that is adapted for young adults. That doesn't mean that they took out any of the content. It just means that they have made it uh, more understandable in terms of the reading level. Okay, but let's go ahead and let's take a look. I hope that you enjoy it. It's definitely a very serious and powerful read about a serious topic, but let's go ahead and let's see what we get. All right, Chapter 1, Mockingbird Players. I was in my late 20s and about to start my fourth year at the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee when I met Walter McMillan. His case was one of the many I was trying to frantically keep up with. After all, a crisis was growing. Alabama had no public defender system, which meant that many death row prisoners didn't have lawyers to represent them. My friend Ava Ansley was at an Alabama prison project to track cases and match lawyers to prisoners. In 1988, we got federal funding to create a legal center that could represent people on death row. I'd already worked on lots of death penalty cases in several southern states, sometimes winning a stay, which puts a stop to the execution just minutes before an electrocution was scheduled. When I'd last visited death row, I met with 5 desperate condemned men: Willie Tabb, Vernon Madison, Jesse Morrison, Harry Nix, and Walter McMillan. The most memorable thing about Walter was how insistent he was that he'd been wrongly convicted. Mr. Bryan, I know it may not matter to you, but it's important to me that you know that I'm innocent and didn't do what they said I did. Not no kind of way, he told me in the meeting room. His voice was level, but laced with emotion. I nodded. I had learned to accept what clients tell me until the facts suggest something else. I'm sure I'm not the first person on death row to tell you that they're innocent, but I really need you to believe me. My life has been ruined. This lie they put on me is more than I can bear, and if I don't get help from someone who believes me... His lip began to quiver, and he clenched his fist to stop himself from crying. I'm sorry. I know you'll do everything you can to help me, he said, his voice quieter. My instinct was to comfort him. His pain seemed so sincere. There wasn't much I could do, but I reassured him that I would look at everything carefully. Back at the office, I went through the mound of records until I found the transcripts from Walter McMillan's trial. The trial had been short. I started reading. Walter McMillan was at least 15 years older than me, not particularly well educated, and he hailed from a small rural community. Though he had lived in Monroe County his whole life, he had never heard of the author Harper Lee, also a Monroeville, Alabama native, or her award-winning novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. Mockingbird tells the story of an innocent black man who is accused of raping a white woman in the 1930s and is bravely defended by Atticus Finch, a white lawyer. What is often overlooked is that the black man falsely accused in the story was not successfully defended by Atticus. Tom Robinson, the wrongly accused black defendant, is found guilty. Later, he dies when, full of despair, he makes a desperate attempt to escape from prison. He is shot 17 times in the back by his captors. While the novel captivated millions of readers and confronted them with some of the realities of race and justice in the South, its harder truths did not take root. Walter McMillan, like the character Tom Robinson, grew up in one of several poor black settlements outside of Monroeville, where he worked the fields with his family before he was old enough to attend school. Educational opportunities for black children in the 1950s were limited, but Walter's mother got him to the dilapidated C school for a couple of years when he was young. By the time he was 8 or 9, though, he became too valuable for plowing, planting, and picking cotton to justify the remote advantages of continuing school. Some backstory about Walter's hometown. Monroe County had been developed by plantation owners in the 19th century for the production of cotton. The fertile, rich black soil of the area attracted white settlers from the Carolinas, who amassed plantations and a huge slave population. Even decades after the Civil War and emancipation, the African American population toiled in the fields of the Black Belt as sharecroppers and tenant farmers dependent on white landowners for survival. By the 1950s, small cotton farming was replaced with timber farming as Alabama's thriving industry. White landowners opened pulp and paper mills across the region. Acres and acres of land were converted to growing pine trees for paper mills and industrial uses. Times were changing, for better and for worse. African Americans, largely excluded from this new paper industry, found themselves confronting new economic challenges even as they won basic civil rights. The brutal era of sharecropping and Jim Crow was ending, but what followed was persistent unemployment and worsening poverty. The region's counties remained some of the poorest in America. Walter started his own pulpwood business in the 1970s. He smartly and bravely borrowed money to buy his own power saw, tractor, and pulpwood truck. By the 1980s, he had developed a solid business that didn't make much extra money, but afforded him something else he valued: independence. If he had worked at the mill or the factory, the kind of job that most poor black Alabamians worked, it would mean working for white business owners and dealing with the racial stress that implied in 1970s and 1980s Alabama. Walter couldn't escape the reality of racism, but having his own business gave him a flexibility that many African Americans did not enjoy. Walter's independence won him respect and admiration, but it also sparked contempt and suspicion. His freedom was, to some of the white people in town, well beyond what African Americans with limited education could achieve through legitimate means. Still, he was pleasant, respectful, generous, and accommodating, which made him well liked by the people, black or white, with whom he did business. Like anyone, Walter had his flaws. Though he and his wife Minnie had 3 children, it was well known that he was romantically involved with other women. Tree work is notoriously demanding and dangerous. With few ordinary comforts in his life, the attention of women was something Walter did not easily resist. There was something about his rugged exterior, his long bushy hair and uneven beard, combined with his generous and charming nature, that attracted the attention of some women. Walter grew up understanding that it was forbidden for a black man to be intimate with a white woman. He didn't initially think much of the flirtations of Karen Kelly, a young white woman he'd met at the Waffle House where he ate breakfast. She was attractive, but he didn't take her too seriously. When her flirtations became more explicit, Walter hesitated and then persuaded himself that no one would know. After a few weeks, it became clear that his relationship with Karen was trouble. She was younger and married. As word got around that the two were friends, she seemed to take a mischievous pride in her intimacy with Walter. When her husband Joe found out, things quickly turned ugly. Karen and Joe had been unhappy and were already planning to divorce. Now, Joe was threatening to take custody of their children and to disgrace her by exposing her relationship with a black man. Soon enough, Walter received a subpoena summoning him to testify at a hearing about the Kellys' custody battle. He knew it was going to cause him serious problems. Nervously, he went to the courthouse. When Walter took the stand, the lawyer for Joe Kelly's husband asked him crude, hostile questions. Walter wanted to forget about the whole ordeal, but the word of the interracial affair spread quickly, and his reputation shifted. No longer the hard-working pulpwood man, known to white people almost exclusively for what he could do with a saw in the pine trees, Walter now represented something more threatening in their eyes. Fears of interracial sex and marriage have deep roots in the United States. In the aftermath of slavery, the creation of a system of racial hierarchy and segregation was largely designed to prevent relationships like Walter and Karen's. In fact, interracial relationships were legally prohibited by an anti-miscegenation statutes. The word miscegenation came into use in the 1860s when supporters of slavery coined the term to promote the fear of interracial sex and marriage and the race mixing that would result if slavery was abolished. For over a century, many Southern law enforcement officials saw it as part of their duty to punish Black men who had been intimate with their white women. Okay, so obviously this is clearly a very serious story, and it's one that has ties to Kill a Mockingbird. So for all of you high school students who have read the book or who are still reading this book, or if you've never read it before, it's definitely worth a look. And then, of course, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson is available on Actively Learn. And if you are interested in this short excerpt, I would tell you to go ahead and check it out. It's definitely worth your time.